This is the Indigenous Futures. Let me get that on the screen. Indigenous Futures panel, where we'll be talking about to Indigenous developers, including myself, because I am also an Indigenous developer. But we'll also be talking to at least Santo Aveiro-Ojeida. I think I'm saying that. So yeah, we're talking about at least to Santo, who is working on a game called CyberRRRevolution there, and possibly the creator of Umurangi Generation, who is Naphtali Faulkner. But we'll see how that works out. And of course, I'm working on Neofeud, and I'm working on Neofeud 2, and of course, I made Neofeud 1, which are both Indigenous games because we're all Indigenous people here. And yeah, so anyways, good to see you. And you want to just introduce yourself and
Yeah, of course. So yes, hi, I'm Santo. I've been on a couple of streams before, but for anyone who might not be familiar with me, I'm based in Canada in Winnipeg, and I've been making games for several years now. And in the last couple of years, I've made a game called Don't Wake the Night, and then I've also made 1870 Cyberpunk Forever, which is a twine game that explores indigenous futurisms and indigenous cyberpunk with like a Guarani lens, which is the nation that I have ancestry in Paraguay and South America. And most recently, with collective artists, I've started, or not started, but I've started to promote the game that we're working on, which is CybeRRRevolution, which kind of continues some research that I've been doing about like indigenous cyberpunk and how that can be expressed through different like I guess tropes is one way to refer to them as tropes of like science fiction and cyberpunk, and also like some like mecha stuff like from anime, and exploring how that can be used to express like different ways of being indigenous, and also different ways of like resisting colonialism and imperialism. And CyberRRRevolution explores like three different stories of three different characters that have to kind of cope with like a post-war reality, and just the different ways that they just kind of live their lives and fulfill their own personal goals as Indigenous people. And yeah, we recently released a trailer for it that came out a couple of weeks ago that just gives like a narrative overview of the game. And we're hoping to release it next year, late next year, hopefully. But we'll see. We're also trying to get more marketing going for it. So depending on how that goes, we'll see what the final date is.
okay, yeah, awesome. So it's cyber R revolution.
Yeah.
Okay, so make sure I say this right next time. But yeah. So
No worries.
it's so you guys are Did you say you see the release date is not set yet?
Yeah, it's like tentatively like fall of next year, and that's mostly just because the last couple of projects that I've done, I kind of like tried to set a like a not a deadline, but just like set kind of like a time limit on it, so that I know that it's like usually I like to spend like 2 years or like have a cycle of 2 years on a game that is longer. And this one is definitely longer than even like some of my previous games. So we'll see if like that holds up. But it's also because I've also been waiting to like just kind of position the game a little more strategically in like in the sense that I would like to apply for funding, apply for publishing, and sometimes those things take time, and they can delay the development cycle. But I'm hoping that like late next year there will be something finalized, just because I'm also I'm the kind of person that like if I spend more than 2 years on a project, then I'm not as excited about it. Like I'd like to have like smaller projects and then move on to like keep the ideas flowing. But in this case, like this one is a bit more of a complex game, since it involves different characters, different like game mechanics that are like different from each other, and also just trying to work with a lot of like I'm working with way more people this time around. In previous projects, usually I work with like maybe 3 to 4 other people. This time I'm working closer with like 5 to 7 other people. So the team is also a little bit bigger, which is great, but also involves just more logistics, like more like like boring production stuff that comes with making a game. But and in that like and also the collaborative aspect that I try to have with games, especially when most of my collaborators are indigenous, and to like also kind of set our own boundaries and set our own like rules as to how we would like to work. Since we all work in different ways, and um, it's up to each of us kind of to decide how we want to take it. And I like to give people that option as well, since especially now since we do everything remotely, right? So it affects sometimes like productivity, but yeah, hopefully by next year it'll be out, and then I can start to like think of other things after that. But yeah.
Yeah, I totally know how that. I mean, I know that I probably should have set a deadline for some games, but if you do, it's important to start games. And I think I said this on one of the dev streams. I've been trying to do more dev streams myself to, help keep. It does help keep the sometimes keep the motivation, because people are like literally watching you. I actually have done like programming, painting, art, doing this stuff like all on stream, and it just kind of keep you a little bit more motivated, and keep you going, because I understand like how it's, if you thinking about a thing for too long, you can kind of feel like you're like retreading the same conversation with yourself over and over and over sometimes, and yeah, that can start to slow down the progress. But yeah, so that's probably a good strategy to have those some kind of deadlines. But I've been I've been working on Neofeud too for a long time, but for I think it's been like, I want to say it's like almost 4 years, 4 years, but not fully. I've been also promoting other games at the same time, so that takes time
Mhm.
as well. Um,
Yeah, and it can be tough sometimes, like when you're working. Like I'm personally working on CybeRRRevolution on like a part-time basis, like so it is tough to like have like a unrelated work that you do during the day, and then like having game development be part-time. Because my goal is to eventually like transition into a more full-time reality with making games, but right now it's part-time, so that's also another reason why it takes a bit longer. But I'm excited for what's coming next year, just because right now we're at the stage where like the mechanics of the game are pretty much locked in. The what's left is to actually just um, build the levels, in the sense that like it's mostly just like actually adding the content rather than trying to figure out how to program something. So it's mostly just like, okay, we have all the tools and we know what we're doing, and the rest of the job is basically putting all the content together in the game. And I'm being a little bit more like, I guess, optimistic with this release, because I also do want to release it in Spanish when it comes out. Just because I do actually like, I read, write, and talk in Spanish pretty fluently, and I've done like formal copywriting in Spanish as well. So I have like experience with translating English to Spanish. So that's kind of another thing that I'm also kind of tentatively planning, because of the themes of the game. Like it is very much about South America, and I would love to have it translated to Spanish to like also have people in South America be able to play it, and then also planning to tentatively translate it to Brazilian Portuguese in the future as well, because that's also a big audience that it would be relatable to, since like um, Guarani people live on like such a wide such a wide area of land in South America, that like there's Guarani people that speak, like when it comes to like European languages, they speak Spanish, and there's others that also speak Portuguese. So it's trying to kind of like, okay, um, trying to figure out which languages people speak so that it can like reach them if possible. And yeah, Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese are kind of those two that I've decided on, but that's definitely another hurdle to cross with like localization and making sure all, especially when it comes to like a game that has a lot of text in it. Um, Localization is something that I always think about a lot, but it's like it's its own job, right? So like even I'm also thinking like, what if I can localize the game into like a particular um, maybe a particular type of Guarani, and even that is gonna take a pretty long time just because there's so many ways to express Guarani that like there's different like localisms that might not translate as well to a video game, and that's kind of where like the localization work comes in. But yeah, that's definitely something that has been more on my mind with this game than with previous games because it is like very explicitly drawing from like specific South American cultures and like Guarani cultures in this case.
Yeah, yeah, totally. That makes sense that it's gonna take some time to translate. I mean, speaking of, yeah, I haven't done any translations myself. But just really quick, I was thinking like maybe we'll just like play the trailer for this game so people can see. You have a trailer on your. Where would be the best place to play the trailer if we were gonna play the Cyber Revolution trailer?
Oh yes, it would be YouTube, so it is up on YouTube. I can quickly look up the link here. Let's see. Yeah, so it is like we have it up on our Twitter, the Brujeria at Work Twitter. We also have it up on our website, which is just brugeriaatwork.com. I'm just waiting for it to load.
This is the one that from November 4th.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Um,
Yeah, okay. I think I've got it. I'll try to put it up on the screen. Let me see here.
okay, cool.
Yeah. 1 second. Okay, so this is the trailer for again. This is the trailer for Santo's game CybeRRRevolution. All right, here we go. Oop. Start from the beginning.
Welcome to the year 18XX, where the bloodiest war of our time has ended, but where the struggle to pick up the pieces continues. Deep in the jungles, the last godly machines known as the Phantoms set out to recover a stolen relic from the hands of a shadowy organization, simply known as the High Synthetic Technocracy. Pilots Sepsis and Splint head into former enemy territory for what may well be their final mission. Meanwhile, a sleepy town receives an unexpected guest who seeks to gain something they cannot remember. Rebel, a tired wanderer, must wait for the arrival of one doctor to receive an answer and to find out what truly happened to their missing past. Elsewhere, a vast desert long thought to have freed itself from an endless war plunges into disaster as a retired sharpshooter discovers familiar enemy tracks. Barrett, a legendary soldier, embarks on a mission to free her people from the grasp of conflict once more. Sepsis, Rebel, Barrett, what destinies will they fulfill? Their stories shall be known as CybeRRRevolution.
All right, so don't forget to if you like that, follow the Brujeria at Work, or
Yeah.
uh, follow Santo, and yeah, just very very cool. It's very well put together. Who did the trailer for you, or did you do that?
Yeah, that's that's a good question. So I did the video editing in the sense that like I storyboarded it and then put in all the like art that I made in there in the game footage. Then the actual soundtrack was made by my close friend Julian, who's also goes by the Nexus Rasp. So they made the track for the trailer, and it was also mastered by the other sound designer who's also a close friend, TVMA. And they've both been working with me on some of the sound design for the game, specifically like soundtracks for like each character. So this one was specifically for the trailer. And we worked on it for a couple of months to like figure out, like get the specific timing just right, getting, making sure that everything was like nicely like synchronized with the audio as well, and that the actual voiceover. So that's the fun part. So I actually got Chris Calhoun to do the voiceover. He is like an anime voice actor who has done like one of his most famous roles is that he did the English voice for Bright Noah for the original like Gundam series.
Oh wow.
Like the 1990 like the 80s one, like the very first one. He
Oh.
did the English voice for that character. So I thought it would be cool to like get like a mech anime voice actor to do the voiceover. Just because like Gundam is something that I've gotten into like in the last like 2 years or so, and that like also kind of influences the aspect of like giant machines of the game. But yeah, no, the trailer like um, I've been working on it on and off for a couple months with this sound designers, and also getting feedback from like other people on the team that weren't maybe directly involved in editing the trailer, but who are working on the game, and to make sure that like what was being represented in the trailer made sense. So like I worked with a narrative designer for a couple of months, and I passed it to her to make sure that like it aligns with what we were working on with regards to like the world building of the game. As the also the concept art pieces that you see in the trailer, so those backgrounds like the desert and the jungle and the town, they were made by layout artist, who's also a close friend of mine, Caloy Feliciano. So the fun thing with those backgrounds is that I gave Kaloy like kind of like different prompts to draw these backgrounds in, to like help illustrate the different like natural environments that are going to show up in the game. And we found that a lot of times like I would send them like specific locations in like Brazil or Paraguay or like central, like the center of South America, to like as references for those backgrounds. But we found that those references sometimes were like very similar to where they grew up in the Philippines. So Kaloy is originally from the Philippines. And for the background they made for the town scene, they actually commented that like that rural town in South America that I sent them a picture of looked a lot like the rural town in the Philippines. So it was fun to kind of like contrast how like these two places that are far apart from each other have some things in common, because either because of things like colonialism or like having to live under imperialism or capitalism, and how that affects how people live like with nature, or how that changes nature. So that was like a really fun process to go through as well, to like brainstorm those designs as well. And Kaloy also does like they do really wonderful backgrounds. Like I specifically brought them on because I will draw a background, but it definitely like is not like my most fun thing to do. And they are just excellent at doing backgrounds. And it's not a coincidence that like a lot of the people that I've been working with on this project, like they come from indigenous or marginalized like backgrounds, be it like indigenous, black, trans, and we all share some things in common, and we also know each other very well. So there's like a deep level of trust that we have with each other, which I think helps with just like being very like transparent with each other about like what we feel works and what we feel doesn't. So that's also something else that I really liked about not just the trailer process, but also like going into this particular cycle of development, like really just leaning on each other to be like honest and give like clear feedback to each other so that we can, you know, uh, give like our best work to each other. But yeah, this was a very fun um, like exercise in a way, and also why I'm more motivated to try and get some more studio funding so that like we can kind of keep that going in the future.
Yeah, totally. I'm just like I'm looking at the some of the sites that this is the what I'm looking at now for people who are watching is the itch.io site that's already up. So you can I guess you could check out more about the game and follow it. It says coming late 2022, so mark your calendars for that. Um, yeah. So you said that yeah, you're Guarani and from Paraguay, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So I was born and raised in Paraguay, and like I'm of like my family is primarily like mixed race, but on my mom's side it is primarily like Guarani. She also has some um, like mostly Guarani, some Afro descendant relatives as well. So there's definitely kind of like I grew up with my mom's family primarily in South America, so that's the more, I guess, more of the culture that I grew up with than in the city, which like might not be as common nowadays.
Hmm.
Just because my mom's family used to live like in the countryside in like rural towns, and I'm kind of like one of the first generations in her family to have actually grown up in the city in Paraguay. Because my grandparents they grew up as campesinos, which like in English that roughly translates to like the peasant class or like peasants in South America. And so I grew up with them in the city, and that's kind of the more what the culture that informed my upbringing, and also what just informs my like worldviews and even just like artistic influences. And a lot of that is also like what I'm trying to bring to this project as well. Because the kind of, I guess, unique aspect of this game is that it is very much like dominantly based on like Guarani culture, specifically of the Guarani people that live in Paraguay and also like parts of Brazil. But I'm also like being mindful of not leaving it open ended in the sense that, it's not clear what culture is happening, but to also give other collaborators room to say, like, oh, like, what if we maybe add this in from like my own culture or from my own upbringing that also speaks to the idea of like anti imperialism and anti colonialism. And that's kind of the approach that I had with Hello in like building those backgrounds is that like they may be from like a totally different place in the world, but like we share that kind of common struggle of like having lived in places that were impacted by imperialism and colonialism. And that's kind of the main idea of the game is like, there's definitely that dominant aspect of it being like based on Guarani culture, but also trying to speak to kind of like a wider audience of um, people in global South countries who can relate to like imperialism, colonialism throughout the decades and now. So that's also another thing that I'm keeping in mind as I kind of also go along in making the game's narrative and making sure that other collaborators kind of can also have a say in like how they want those ideas represented.
Hmm. Um, yeah, totally. So I'm just like I'm just kind of jumping all over the place on the stream, but one person that speaking of like indigenous peoples, kind of from South, I believe Nua Malta refers it to Abiyala. I don't know if that's a word that you use for Americas, but that's one of the words. I think Nua Malta is
Mhm. Yeah, Via Yellow would be like the word that refers to kind of the whole continent of South America and like Central America as well.
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, I was recently in like panels talking about imperialism and Central South American. I was trying to find there's one that was specifically about indigenous futurism on this. There's a lot. But anyways, there's a lot. Oh yeah, here it is. This is kind of talking about the anti-imperialism and indigenous. The concept of Runa Sur. Have you heard of this? It's Evo Morales' plan to make America plurinational.
I've that's been on my radar. Yeah,
you heard about it? Yeah. So there's a whole it's a decolonial. Speaking of anti-colonialism in video games, and so this is like a whole thread about decolonial, plurinational, anti-imperialist moves to try to work with having a native, black, and labor-led organization from April. That is, the head is Evo Morales. Bolivia is the first native president, indigenous president in the Americas. Runastar's word. Anyway, so it's a long discussion. Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Argentina. Yeah, there's a lot to get to talk about there. But I was just thinking like another direction that because if we're talking about decolonial, decolonial futures, indigenous futures. I often will describe that like Bolivia is, of course, Paraguay, all these nations are involved in these struggles, right, against colonialism and imperialism. But Bolivia has had a major success, and I would say like Bolivia is an indigenous future already because they have advanced, they have lithium enrichment. They have renewable technology that's in advance of a lot of colonizer countries actually. And they have one of the world's largest lithium resources that is very important for future, renewable technology, especially batteries and other things as well. But, that's something that I think about often when we're talking about indigenous futures and people. I know we've talked about these on multiple panels. Like, I mean, this is probably the third or the fourth one. Either I've been on yours or you've been on mine, probably. Yeah. So, we all have like, we have like a VIP card, we got the Subway Punch card of each other. Multiple veteran members of each other's shows. But I think that like, there's something, the topic is kind of like that, the concept of indigenous, I think we talked about it a little bit last time, where jumping back to CybeRRRevolution, which is that the indigenous, people's, it's not necessarily, because a lot of people, what misconception that people will have is that indigenous means like underdeveloped. Indigenous means like, basic subsistence. We're talking about campesinos, and it's like in Hawaii, a lot of people don't view indigenous. Even my own brother sometimes will view, say, indigenous Hawaiianness means basic pre-technological, or like quote unquote pre-technological farming. Not to say that there's something wrong with those ways that we have done for hundreds, thousands of years, because we have our own ways of managing land, but that technological way. Because what I do a lot more like you, right? We both do a lot of more tech, not more technological, but we interact with computers, artificial intelligence, digital graphic design, international platforms, more so than my brother does. And some people like will look at that and go, that's not indigenous, or it's not indigenous enough, especially people from colonizer institutions sometimes. Anyway, I'll finish my sentence and then introduce Tali. But so I just that's another direction to take it. And so CybeRRRevolution is a game like a lot of others and other works that are very much, which is good because they're places where you can show that you can be indigenous and very advanced technologically in every way as well, and modern, et cetera, et cetera. And anyways, let me rapidly transition and welcome. What's up, Tali? Can we?
Kia ora. Sorry, I'm a bit late. I was in the middle of developing something and had a bit of a bug and lost track of time. So sorry about that. All apologies.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't have a camera at the moment. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I'm gonna try to see if I can get this on the screen here. Edit. But yeah, Naphtali Faulkner is again the developer of Umurangi Generation, working on, I'm sure, some really cool new projects right now. I'm gonna try to get on the screen here. Actually, the main thing is I'm gonna get your game on the screen. So Umurangi Generation is in the upper left there. You want to just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, kia ora everyone. I think everyone's sort of met me before on the stream, but for those that don't know, my name's Naphtali Faulkner. I'm a Naitarangi designer. Made Umurangi Generation, which is it's a game where you're a photographer, sort of in a I guess urban setting, but it's kind of about sort of how neoliberalism fails. And it came out last year, and I think everyone realised that it was pretty on point with that because everyone saw neoliberalism fail in real time. And so, yeah, that's the game I made, and Chris invited me on, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, we were just talking about Santo's game, which is CybeRRRevolution, and we're just kind of talking about the development process, some of that inspiration, and then we're kind of going off to dealing with decolonization and dealing with things like neoliberalism. But I'll just say really quick that I've played all of Umurangi Generation on the stream and on this Twitch channel, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has not played it yet. I mean, you probably know that if you follow me. I try to shout it out at least once stream, or so definitely, yeah. It is a silver spook, silver based indigenous, good game award recipient. You can play this game, and I won't come yell at you on the internet. No. It's a really, I actually like it just as a chill game. It's a first person photography game, and the art, everything. To be honest, like, it's really been both of your games, 1870 Cyberpunk Forever from Santo and Umurangi Generation, both were inspirations on Neofeud 2, because Neofeud 1, that's of course my game, is not the most. Neofeud 1, I don't put a lot of overtly indigenous Hawaiian stuff into it, even though it is a Hawaii story of my life as a native Hawaiian, etc., etc. But the way that the art and the inspiration of it's very, both of them are kind of, they're not necessarily cyberpunk specifically, but they're cyberpunk adjacent, science fictional, futuristic, set in the present, but also with definitely indigenous aspects to them. And so they've been an inspiration on when I'm working on Neofeud 2, thinking about how you guys have both like integrated your own language, culture, art, ways, etc. And so anyways, yeah. So yeah.
No, I think there's lots to talk about. I think when it comes to this idea of decolonizing games, or getting people in there where they need to. Like I've been following Santo stuff for a while, and looks like that thing's getting ready to be shown soon, eh? Like getting out there and stuff like that. I think it's the thing I kind of think about is it's kind of like something, I guess, is kind of this whole thing where we got to tell our own stories in the space, because you kind of can't really trust non-indigenous people to do it, right? Because they'll probably like screw it up or try and both sides it. That's kind of what I've been thinking about lately. Just kind of that idea that like we've got to be the ones, I think, to tell those stories, because so much has sort of been screwed up in the past when it comes to that. And I think like sovereignty of indigenous knowledge is a really big thing that you got to kind of look out for in the game space, because so much has sort of been extracted by capitalism, I guess, when it comes to the space. Like I guess the thing I'm just sort of thinking about is kind of like Spook, we were on that panel with John Romero. What was that, last year or this year? I can't even remember.
This year.
This year, that's right. And it was this whole thing where he's talking about all the stuff that he got id to do, which are all the best parts of games, like mods and that. And you can see straight away that those are indigenous ways of doing, the sharing and the not the control that you see often in I think the more commercial game space, where I mean, just this week, you saw that Rockstar releases this thing, and it's very obviously just like a capitalist cash grab, and there's no respect given to sort of the how would you put it, like open nature of games. You had all these people sort of making mods for those games, and then they just sort of put the iron hammer down and just if they can't make money off it, they're just going to stop that creativity from happening. So I think there's like a lot to talk about there. I've really been honestly I've been thinking a lot about that thing we had with John there, because it kind of makes you think, like, a lot of those ideas that are the best ideas in this space are Indigenous ideas, and they're ones where we all know that comes from how our cultures operate and this stuff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm just trying to find the video. I think Holly has a link to it in the chat there. If you want to watch the Indigenous Game Devs with John Romero. I can't get the... Let me see if I can grab it real fast. But yeah, if you missed that, I definitely remember that one very clearly. I'm still kind of like, don't believe that we got to talk to John Romero, the creator of freaking Doom and Wolfenstein, and is like a legend in the gaming industry. Like basically like founded, like not co-founded with id Software. The first person shooter genre basically. And John, I was actually surprised that John was actually very new. John Romero is Yaqui, Cherokee, and Mexican / Aztec. I'm not sure exactly how John identified the last one. It changes, but John is definitely, he's basically like full Indigenous, and knew actually about Hawaii. I was like, wow, he's like, yeah, I heard the Hawaiians are really struggling with this colonizers taking a lot of the land and from Native Hawaiians who don't have any to live on. They're unable, and I was like, so I'm basically, yeah, it's totally like I wouldn't think that, but I think like a lot of the Indigenous community is a lot more connected than a lot of people realize, and sometimes Indigenous people realize, and it's very much a different way to look at. I think it's a different way to look at things, which is like, as we're all in like relationships with each other, like in a sense that we're like we're related to each other. We are collectively in a global struggle. Like, I'll throw it back to Santo, because Santo was talking about how in the development there were at least one Filipino person was involved in CybeRRRevolution, but it was like, oh wow, we have a lot in common, even though we're like thousands of miles away, like on the west of the Pacific, and I'm in the center of, or I'm in South America. But there's like a lot that we share, and in terms of colonial struggle, in terms of like the way that we live and the way that we've had to deal with the colonization process as Indigenous people in Asia Pacific, all the way to Central South America, and North America as well. And so, yeah. Anyways, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that especially with like CybeRRRevolution, like I mentioned that the game is primarily based on Guarani culture, but even within Guarani culture, that's like a very big umbrella, and that's kind of part of the reason why I initially decided to make it a game that has like 3 different characters in it, was to like show different ways that people live in the same like region and like with a similar culture, but that are like unique and different from each other. So like, for example, like of the 3 characters, we have the one that lives like in the more like heavily forested like jungle area that has like the giant mechs, and then we have the other character that is more in like the wetlands and like the more marshy region of like the world, and then we have a third character that is in like the more arid desert area nearby, and they all belong to like are based on Guarani culture, but of different areas of different regions. So like the character that lives in the jungle is more closely based on like Mbua Guarani culture, which is kind of like more into going into Brazil. And then the second character is more Ashe, which the Ashe people are also fall underneath like that Guarani umbrella, and they're more like around some of the wetlands, around some of the like urban areas in the country. And then we have the old character who lives in the desert, and she is more like kind of the Guarani people who are also campesinos, which is like the peasant class. So like more like the peasantry that of Indigenous people that were forced to kind of take up a life of like very exploitative like agriculture up until now. So part of the reason why I wanted to design it that way was like to kind of offer different views of what it means to be indigenous, even within the same culture, to kind of like drive the idea home that like indigenous people can look and be very different in the way that they do things, in the way that we exist and live our lives. Like even within the same nation, there can be like a wide variety of people that are going to have different histories, but that are going to be similar in some ways. And that's also why I just really wanted to have the option to like offer that range of experiences. And also because there's also like to go along with like the environments like jungle, wetlands, and like drier regions, is that there's also like, even just in the center of South America, there's so many different environments and like different like I guess like wildlife and things like that that can vary differently even within just like a very small area. And that's also kind of what I wanted to get across as well. And yeah, and also like working with different collaborators on the project that aren't all from South America specifically, but come from other marginalized backgrounds, and like really tapping into their artistic and cultural influences as well, and seeing how we can kind of also imbue that into the narrative, and making sure that find those points of like connection that we can kind of relate to with each other, that ends up a lot of the time being about anti-imperialism, about anti-colonialism.
Yeah, totally. I did like the way that you've kind of incorporated all these different styles of indigenous peoples and ways into a single, or not like into a single game, and kind of like it's something that's it's something that I've thought about too. Is just like how do I also, this is me because I'm trying to work on games myself. How do I work on games that are representing indigenous culture while not like trying to not step on my own culture sometimes, because like sometimes I feel like I don't know enough about my own culture, which is part of like having your language banned when you're born and your culture banned, which Hawaiian was in 1983 and still is. And so it's been a kind of a struggle trying to like recapture a lot of that. But and just really quickly, there's something I'll show a little bit of Neofeud 2. So like Neofeud 2 has a few areas, and like the thing that I don't know if you can see it on screen, but yeah, this area is like a Neofeud 2. Neofeud 1 is very dystopian. There's a lot of hellscape, like this, like people are flying over, Blade Runner 2049 / this, Elysium, cyberpunk, cross between somewhere between Mad Max, the worst Mad Max, Fallout, New Vegas, and the worst of Cyberpunk 2077. And Neofeud is definitely like more of a cautionary tale. And this is like a panning scene I was working on. And then and there's a scene where it's just like endless war zone with collapsed like military industrial, like the U.S. Empire makes like Raytheon star destroyers and Northrop Grumman Death Stars, like literally labeled that, not literally Northrop Grumman, but like kind of like in Neofeud satirical style. And then there's like indigenous areas where you have super advanced indigenous technology that are they actually have warp gates. They have like FTL and super fast like Mach 27 bullet trains, and they can like wield suns, but they're also like peacefully coexisting, and they also have like ecological relationships with nature, and also they've been existing without colonizing other people for 10,000 or 10 million years. It's unclear. And so it's kind of like but I'm trying to like do that without having to infuse each it's not Hawaii, it's not Samoa, it's not China. Actually, I'm part Asian, and my heritage is Asian and Pacific Islander, so I have like inflections of Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, like inspirations in like ways that people are, art styles and such. But it's not any one of those because it can't really be. It's Neofeud 2 takes place like not even on Earth. So, but they do speak of the super advanced future, indigenous peoples from like Alpha Centauri. Speak highly of the indigenous, Alkebulan, Yajo, and Abiyala, or sometimes they call it Africa, Asia, and the Americas, but that's a colonizer name for these places. And they speak of these people as like very advanced and indigenous, but unfortunately, there were these barbarians that kind of descended mostly from this cold, sad place called Europe. Most, not all of them, but most of them. And then they kind of, used gunboats and mass organized violence and disinformation to lie to everybody about the inventions that they had and all of their advanced technology. And so like Neofeud 2 has been kind of like trying to like, learn about all this history from all of the indigenous peoples of Earth, all the colonized peoples, which is what indigenous, I argue, I sometimes I'm fighting against the grain when I'm talking about this word indigenous, because, I don't want it to mean, being that little pet Native Hawaiian, like doing the hula for you, or your pet indigenous person that you bring, the Indian in the cupboard that you trot out when you need to get elected. And then you, as 1/64th of your heritage, or, Justin Trudeau, or I don't know, American president, talking about hashtag reconciliation, and then you put the Indian back in the cupboard when you don't need them anymore, and you keep them developed and with boil water advisories. So I like to, part of Neofeud 2 is like destroying that entire narrative and going, actually the most advanced civilizations were and are indigenous. In fact, Hawaii had the world's first universal healthcare system, which Wikipedia doesn't want to put on their white supremacist capitalist website that's run by a billionaire from Silicon Valley. And the US history books and all of Europe's history books don't want to put any of that down either. And Bolivia and other parts of the world that are doing better now, and they're like actually advancing beyond the Western world, are starting to prove that they're not proving, they're just like being who they are and fighting global neoliberalism and colonialism. And people don't want to hear that. But sometimes I feel like people are a little bit afraid to step on the shoes of colonizer consumer demographics, I would say. I definitely felt like I had to not talk about Hawaii too much in Neofeud 1 for reasons. It was my first game and I was like worried, but but sometimes I feel like there actually is a bigger market out there, and I'm sure Tali is actually, I know you had the game translated to a lot of other languages. There's a bigger, wider world out there of people that are ready to see, futures, pasts, fantasy worlds that are not centering Euro settler colonizer perspectives and culture and art and characters. And anyway, I'll stop going off about that for now because it's probably going to get too spicy.
Well, I could say the following is that, so the thing I kind of think about is, there is a balance when it comes to all that. Because for me, it's this idea that you don't want to put stuff out there that can be misused. Like, when I worked at a university and, it was running well, we had like an elders group. And they sort of had this thing where they would say, do no harm, where the idea was, if you're going to do research at this university through this school, you do no harm. That means like when you go to community and you, want to work with community on your research, you don't go in there and you bring up trauma. You don't go in there and you exploit, knowledge or land or resources or anything. You don't go in and you do the wrong thing. And I think that's like a really big thing when it comes to, making games like this, where you don't really want to contribute to, the sort of torture porn that you often see in this space, where when marginalized people are put in games, there's this sort of thing people want to do where it's sort of like, let's go through the, Indigenous experience. Let's go through the trans experience, or let's go through the African American experience. And that means let's bring up all the nasty stuff that makes white people feel guilty. You know what I mean? I think it's this kind of thing where that ends up being this kind of thing where, like, it doesn't lead to good stories being told. It hurts the people involved. And the only people who get a kick out of it are, kind of people who are a bit sick in the head, to be honest. I think the thing I kind of think about as well is kind of this idea that with something like Umurangi Generation, that sort of not putting specific knowledge into it, or not, using specific, iwi or patterns or something like that, is the kind of thing where people can see a shared experience there. So an example of that could be, as a Māori person, we have things the Crown did to us, but the reality is, the Crown and other forms of the state did those exact same things all around the earth. And, there's that shared understanding of what that means. And I think it's the kind of thing where a lot of people don't realize, but there's actually more of us who share those experiences than there are people who get to willfully ignore it. Now, those people might be, a majority in a country, but I'm talking globally here. The entire population of Ireland knows what it means when, I would say, the Crown's doing a land grab, or when, you could talk about this idea of when the state introduces drugs into communities to try and destroy them so it can go and gentrify them, right? That's a really common thing that happens all around the world. And so I think there's just this kind of thing where, like, when it comes to these kind of stories, we shouldn't probably be too specific because, there are points where there's been a lot of theft in the past and it's not really going to end. I think there's the kind of thing where, we see that kind of theft where it's not necessarily the, the right wingers doing it sometimes. Sometimes it's your, liberals, if that makes sense. You could argue they're right wing as well, but you know what I mean by that? Like, it's not always your sort of, evil boogeyman type person doing it. Sometimes it's your sort of well-intentioned liberal who will want to take something that they don't own and, be something that, we're going to own this now. An example of that is, when Umurangi started to get really successful, I was in Wellington at the time, meeting with some of the artists, and we were there for one of the New Zealand games festivals, and I got an email from one of the councils there, and they said, we want you to do that, but do it based in this place. I'm not going to be specific because I don't want to shame anyone too much, but it's this kind of thing where I just said, okay, well, your price, if you want to do what that game is, will cost you about $2 million because I'll have to consult with all the community, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? It's this kind of thing where you say, like, this stuff has value, and, it's not the kind of thing where you can just transplant it. And this is what I mean by, we've got to really tell our own stories because we're the only ones really equipped to do it. And, the moment a third party comes in and they'll try and say, we want to tell, we want to tell a Hawaiian story, but we don't want to consult with community. What does that mean? It probably means they're going to try and fill in the blanks based on their, Western knowledge framework, and it doesn't work like that. Like a Hawaiian family and a sort of, British family, it has a completely different dynamic. You can't try and shift that around. The relationships to sort of, older family members and stuff is completely different. And, I'm not even too familiar with Hawaiian family structures, but if I know they're similar to sort of Māori ones, like because of our sort of shared Pacifica stuff there, I know that it's different already, and I don't need to know the specifics to know that. But it seems that there's like this, this sort of thing in the game space where there's kind of like, I think, a bit of an idea that, people can just sort of guess what we do and then just do it, and we won't bat an eye. Like, I know Tim, Conquest of Dread, he's been on here for a while. He's made that point over and over again. Why using Moko in games? Why using this? Or, the one where it was that this land is our land. Why haven't you talked to those communities? And it's really obvious they haven't, and they'll just bullshit to your face. Oh, we have. Yeah, right. Okay. Anyway, I'll stop my ramble now. I don't know. That's what I've kind of been thinking about a lot lately. Is just that whole, how's the space kind of going to develop in the future? Because I mean, my idea is to eventually get some sort of publisher going that just does Indigenous stuff. Because the way I kind of see it is, it'd be better to do something like that where those games can come and just do things the right way, whilst also not having to answer dumb questions whilst doing stuff the right way. Like the thing I kind of think about is there's always that expectation, can you do it for free? And I think, that starts to land into a bit of a hot area, because it's kind of that whole thing is, you've got to kind of do, you got to do it properly, you know what I mean? And if that means like, spending a day with someone, you know, and they've got to take time off working or whatever. I mean, you can't just say do it for free. That's silly.
Yeah, totally. I just want to give Conquests of Dread, also known as Tim. We're always raiding into our relative Tim after after our streams. Tim is a Twitch streamer and also a very talented artist and a tattoo artist, and yeah, very upset whenever you put Moko. And just one more thing on the thing that you said, then I'll give it over to Santo. But I was thinking, like, when you said, like, people will show up in Hawaii and they'll be like, oh, we're gonna make a story about. Oh, they're always making stories in and about so-called about the Hawaiian experience. The most famous one recently was White Lotus, which is a story about wealthy liberal white California family in Hawaii, and it has basically 1.5 or just one Hawaiian character that has a speaking part, and is a total criminal and nothing about Hawaii, and it's totally just white people telling their stories in Hawaii, and how it was a lot of fun to have a good time here. And it was sold. It's funny because this story, White Lotus, was sold as this TV show it has some pretty big name actors in it. This is a show that's better than the other ones because it is anti-tourism. It talks about how white people visiting in other colonized countries aren't good. It's supposed to be like punching at themselves or something, but even still, it's like doesn't it's like, I think I'm doing better. You're saying kind of like there's a right wing definitely just overtly mask off. Yeah, I hate non-white people, and they should stay down there in the mud and stay underdeveloped and stay our cultural farm to sell fake products or whatever we want to do. But then there's the liberals that, like, some of them are well-meaning, right? And some of them are, and sometimes left is, as well. But then they're like, oh, we're going to be better. We're going to tell a story about wealthy white multimillionaires with stolen land, like Mark Zuckerberg, who has 1,200 acres and counting on Kauai. And we're going to tell a story about how we're not so nice there sometimes. And the whole story is like, doesn't take any account actual Hawaiian people. They don't care to talk about Hawaiian, the actual Hawaiian perspective, right? Which is, this whole thing is in legal occupation. I mean, not only the Native Hawaiian, that's not just me, the so-called raving Hawaiian, but like the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights said that Hawaii is undergoing a strange form of illegal occupation and fraudulent annexation, and the United States government is completely illegitimate in Hawaii and should immediately withdraw all of its aircraft carriers, all of its military, and all of its so-called government buildings because they are illegitimate. But but none of that was taken into account on White Lotus, and anyways, but yeah,
I was gonna say, I think there's like something there because you always get those movies where it's about like racism or something like that from like say the civil rights era, and you see those people who are just a little bit happy to be dropping the N-word, or like just a little bit more oh yeah, no, we're showing it's a bad thing, but it's like you're still acting it out in this really like authentic and like I think there is like some strength to showing the brutality of that stuff and not watering it down, but at the same time there's also, I think it's very obvious to see those ones where they've taken extreme liberties to portray something in a negative light, but then they'll dial it back because they don't want to sort of offend certain sensibilities around do you kind of get what I mean? I'm trying to go through my words here, but it'd be like let's say, for example, I think there was a movie that came out in Australia a while back, and it was sort of looking at, the history of the stolen generation. And, that's another thing where this is a really common thing amongst a lot of cultures that have been invaded is, theft of kids and, the destruction of culture generationally and stuff. But basically, it's this film that sort of, shows the destruction of that and also the journey of these kids. But at the same time, it has this very, very softened version of what the eugenics theory actually was. Where they try to say, oh, you see, it was just this silly thing and only a couple of people, how could anyone believe this, when they don't really go into the fact that, this is a deeply ingrained thing that's still around today, or, they'll have like a character who's, able to see beyond all the, they're able to see beyond, the current headspace of, liberals or whatever, and they're suddenly a good guy that has all this stuff smashed into him, and it just, it's that whole thing of like white saviors and stuff. But I think it's just one of those things where, honestly, like, if you find that entertaining, what's wrong with you? Hey, like, it's just such a. Sorry, I'm really bad with words at this time of day. I hope I've been really, stuffing these up and forming good sentences or whatever. But like, I'm thinking kind of like there's a paper by Brendan Hokufitu who talks about the film Whale Rider, which is a great film in a way, but at the same time, it's also this one where the core hook of the story is based on a fabrication or a misunderstanding of Maori society by Pakeha. Like, basically, he argues this idea that like that actually isn't our way. Like the patriarchal sexism that's in that movie. The idea is that for those who haven't seen the movie, the young female protagonist wants to sort of do a certain right, and the patriarch of the family says, no, you can't do that, it's just for men. And the reality is that's not actually true. That's like a invention where when Pakeha come to Aotearoa, they sort of saw things that weren't actually going on, but because their way of seeing the world was that men are superior, then that's how they interpreted it, and that's how they wrote it down. When the reality is, you'll find little trace of that in sort of the actual like Maori history, verbally or carved into our art that's still around.
Yeah, totally. I just wanted to, kind of. I got a picture of Whale Rider. You should know what that is. If you don't, it's pretty good. It also has Cliff Curtis, who happens to also be somebody that showed up to my college courses at one point and gave a talk about trying to make Indigenous movies and shows and games, which I was working on in like 2004 at one point. There was going to be a giant, like, international, huge, like, it was like, think of Matrix Online, the Avengers, Marvel Cinematic Universe all put together, but with like Pacifica, like Hawaii kind of centered, but it was this huge project. We had LA producers, people who did the special effects for the Matrix, many of whom were actually Hawaiian. Some people might actually not know that, but there was this huge project. Cliff Curtis came, and it never worked out. It was called Black Sand Hawaii. One of my college professors, who was a producer in Hollywood, Native Hawaiian. His name is Peter Britos. But anyways, all of that aside, back to I wanted to throw into Santo because we haven't heard for a while. But like when you're speaking of like me and Tali, we go. I go off for like 25 hours at a time. I gotta save some of my vocal cords. But Santo, like in terms of like how do you see like people making? I don't know if you have a take on that, but like making the way that your culture is represented or isn't represented. Do you feel like is it there's too much of people that don't understand your Indigenous cultures making shows or in games, or is it kind of doesn't really bother you that much, or I don't know what you think about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Usually, so I do think that I think it depends on the particular medium. I think Guarani culture is more negatively represented in film right now than like other forms of media. And the reason I say that is that like there's obviously a lot of movies that take place in like Brazil or that take place in that area where Guarani people live in that will either negatively impact them, like because they have to be, moved from and forcibly relocated from those locations, or the movie that itself is about like portraying them in a very negative light. And sometimes, and TV productions in South America will also do this, where they go to like a fairly isolated Guarani community, where they might not speak Spanish or any other languages fluently. They just speak in Guarani, and they will go there and film movies or film TV shows and portray them in a very negative way, but they are not aware of what's happening. So it's not uncommon for that to happen in the sense that, you know, they'll be used for films and for TV, and they'll be in it, and they don't understand what it's about, and they don't really get an explanation. And then when the actual, you know, movie or TV show comes out, wherever, whether it's like, you know, South America only or global, it does portray them in a very negative way, either because like the TV or movie is kind of portraying them as like ignorant or like, you know, underdeveloped or in some way. I know there was, I think, a couple of years back, it might have been like around maybe 2014. I think Eli Roth or another horror director made a movie that supposedly would takes place in Brazil, and it's kind of like the movie that you mentioned about the tourist kind of reminded me of that, because the movie itself is like, oh, some white tourists go to Brazil and they get kidnapped by a Guarani tribe who are cannibals. And the horror movies about like, oh, there's these cannibals chasing after us in the jungles and we have to like outrun them or whatever. And supposedly what they wanted to do with the movie is like, oh, actually the movie's about white tourists going somewhere where like they shouldn't be going, and imposing themselves on indigenous people. But at the same time, they still end up making the indigenous people like this very harmful trope of like aggressive cannibals, because cannibalism is something that exists in some Guarani cultures, in that it's practiced. You know, it's very much associated with like mourning someone. When someone dies, you eat part of their body, or like it's something very personal and sacred. But obviously, to white people, cannibalism is something like deeply evil and bad. And so that's the kind of stereotype that also, or like very negative stereotype that that has existed about Guarani people, that like, oh, especially the ones that live very deep in the jungle or who live, you know, isolated from other communities. They're like, oh, they're all cannibals who just eat people, or who, you know, will just kill people randomly. And so that kind of portrayal is very pervasive of Guarani people. Especially you know, it even affects it to the point where when in Paraguay, for example, when Guarani people come for you know, marches and protests, when they come in, they will bring their you know, traditional tools and sacred weapons as well, and people will say like, oh my god, they're here to like kill everyone, or to, you know, um, kill everything that's in their path, when like that stereotype has also been kind of reinforced by the media that they are negatively portrayed in. So I think that way, like, film and TV has definitely been very harmful to like propagate that myth that, oh, like, you know, these indigenous people um are evil and they need to, you know, convert to something more modern like Catholicism, especially there. And that has been like very obviously very violent, and people in South America and globally use that as an excuse to, you know, justify the deforestation that goes on in Brazil and Paraguay, or just justify the violence that happens there. With games in particular, what I've personally experienced is that people will reach out to me sometimes to chat about maybe like consultation, or to talk to me about like, oh, can you read my thing, or can you, you know, service my indigenous person to tell me that, you know, these things that I'm putting in my game are okay. And usually it's coming from people that either work at very large studios that, you know, make millions of dollars a year, or it's coming from people that belong to organizations that definitely have a very big budget. Um, and pretty much like 100% of the time so far, I give them my sellout number. So I have a sellout number that it's like, if you can, I'll give you this number, and if you pay me, maybe I will help you out. But so far, no one has accepted my offer. So whenever those people come into my emails and are asking me that, and I know that they make a lot of money, I will give them my sellout number, and so far no one has accepted my offer. So that's also the other thing that I've experienced, is that if you truly cared about this and you're making millions of dollars in profit a year, what I'm asking for is actually not that much. It might sound like a lot for the job that you're asking me to do, but I am merely taking what I feel like I deserve for something that I know that I'm gonna be taken advantage of during, which is why I give like a very high number, because it's like, if you can pay me this, like, I will be surprised. But I also I'm not very eager to actually do those jobs, so it kind of ends up working in my favor because the number just scares them away. But in that sense, like, I just prefer to put my energy into my own projects and to supporting other Indigenous made projects. And like what was mentioned before as well, about being careful of what to include or not in the game. Like, I am of that approach as well, where like, anything that I feel would be, extracted from other people, whether they're well-meaning or not, I either don't put it in the game, or I just put it in a different way that, like, if you belong to that culture, or if you're Indigenous, or if you're of a particular community, then it's like, you'll get it, but it might not make sense to, non-Indigenous people, for example. And that's kind of how I approach some of the choices that I make, design ways. Like, I offer something that, is gonna resonate with the audience, that isn't gonna, is going to, not exploit it, but like enjoy it, in a positive way, without feeling the need to, extract whatever's there for profit.
Yeah, just really quick, on the topic of, because you brought up how the negative portrayals of Indigenous people, especially speaking of cannibalism, fuck Captain Cook. We might have done. He might have not survived trying to colonize Hawaii in a certain point in history, but in the negative portrayal, because also Hawaii, we also have there are practices that are similar to what you were speaking about, Santo, about there is like flesh eating, but it's more in a ritualistic. It's not like we just eat the people for food and because of some kind of satanic, demonic, barbaristic, just like bloodthirsty, kind of subhumanizational way to portray an Indigenous people as quote unquote uncivilized. And so just to kind of tie how this all does really matter. This is not, the colonization is not in the past. It continues to this day, and that these negative portrayals. I spent a lot of time talking about the problems of colonizer produced film, games, etc. All the time, but they really do impact, because when people think that the Indigenous people, for example, in that show you're talking about, shows the Indigenous people harming, kind of just this kind of monstrous threat to the tourists, to the white tourists. That is literally how the United States backed coup of Bolivia, which again I was brought up was one of the most successful indigenous countries. And yes, that the U.S. backed in fascists under the AOS and the CIA, basically described the indigenous. She held a giant Bible up and said, "This Christianity, our white, she didn't say white, but our Christian whites in Bolivia, great country, is being invaded by satanic, demon worshiping, and a lot of other racist terms that our friend Joey has talked to Vosh, and all of him and his audience used it against him. You demonic peoples will be driven back into the jungle. Bolivia is a Christian country, and we don't want these Indians, right, that are coming and making a mess of our beautiful Christian." That is people were gunned down in the street, not only in Bolivia, and today, not just this is continuing to this day. This is from 11th on Telesur, which is a Bolivian actual indigenous and socialist led news organization, we won't allow another coup. The Bolivian president Arce is currently under threat from continued U.S.-backed far-right, anti-indigenous and anti-socialist threat. And this would be the third time the United States has couped or attempted to coup this country. And they get their momentum to do this on the back of these perpetuated narratives that the masses of the people either believe, don't even realize, they subconsciously are imbibing. And these have real consequences for people, indigenous people, all people, attempts to, if you want to deal with the problem of capitalism and neoliberalism as well, because these successful projects, many of them, I would argue basically all of them, the ones that have been successful, are led by indigenous peoples of various parts of the world. So anyway, that's just I thought I'd tie that current events to what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of that is also thinking about current events also like influences what ends up going in some of my works as well. With CybeRRRevolution, like even though it's very much taking place in kind of like an alternate universe or an alternate reality, a lot of the stories are very much based on like actual like events that are either ongoing or that have happened in the past as well. So to give like a very quick rundown, like for example, the story about the jungle and giant mechs, there's a key kind of landscape there that appears that is like called Cerro Guasu in Paraguay. So it's like a really, really big hill essentially that is the ancestral home of the Paitautera, which is like another Guarani community. And that hill like has been the kind of like place of a lot of armed conflict, in that the government's army of the country continuously pushes indigenous people off this land that has been their ancestral home for like thousands of years. And that mountain is also like just where a lot of different armed conflicts happen, and that actual landscape shows up in the game as like a goal for the characters to reach, and to eventually like take back as their own territory, to say that like this place that we originally came from, that our culture is tied to, is very important to us, and we need to have it to continue existing as people. And then the second character that happens more in like an urban like town scenario is also very deeply inspired by like general concepts of like reconnecting to one's culture after being separated from your family or being separated from your relatives due to colonialism, imperialism, many different things. And that one is also very directly inspired by just the different ways indigenous people in Paraguay were separated from one another, either through genocide or through different colonialist projects that really separated people. A really big problem in Paraguay and in Brazil as well is like hydroelectric dams, because they flood the waters flood wherever there's a lot of indigenous people living. So the hydroelectric companies will forcibly remove a lot of these indigenous people and move them somewhere else where they've never lived. That is not their ancestral home. So then they no longer have the original plants and the original animals that they have always known. And obviously they're being forcibly removed so that it can be flooded with water, and then that electricity just ends up going not to them. Like ends up going to the cities where upper class, middle to upper class people live. And then the third character is very much inspired by, I've mentioned, like the peasant class in Paraguay and also throughout South America, which is largely made up of indigenous and Afro-descendant people who live in very, very bad conditions until today, because they're very much in a situation where a lot of the farmland in South American countries, especially in Paraguay, like something like 99% of the land in Paraguay, of the farmland in Paraguay, is owned by private companies. So most pretty much all of the peasants in Paraguay, the land that they work and all the profit they make doesn't actually ever go to them. They're making it for someone else, for a private corporation or for a family that basically owns their labor, and they get nothing in exchange. So a lot of those kind of like real world events help influence this game, that even though it's not set exactly in the real world, it's still very much based on things that happen or continue happening in like our reality.
Yeah, just really quick, in case you missed it earlier, the game that Santo was talking about is called CybeRRRevolution, and you can it's cyber with the R and then revolution after it, and we showed the trailer earlier. If you are somebody who wants to support indigenous game makers, of course, Santo and Brujeria at Work, that is the group that's working on this game, are doing a really good job on this, and very excited for it. Yeah, it looks really cool. And yeah, like all the background that you're talking about that influences it is I'm sure it's going to be a really rich, very entertaining, and then also people will probably learn a lot from this game, as I think a lot of indigenous games, when we're able to make them, and we have the what we call, as Tali was saying, the our own telling our own stories. They often are. So but yeah, one other thing I wanted to say, it's because I think somewhere back, jumping back a few threads. I think Naphtali mentioned white saviors. I actually made this album. It's called Indigenous Aloha Civilization. That's all about the advanced civilizations of the world, indigenous civilizations, against the Western barbarisms that have not been too good and stole a lot of ideas. But one of the songs is literally called White Savior, White Peril. And this is a song just for you, white saviors. All the Lukes rescuing the damsels, the Ewoks, the Obi-Wans, the Uyghurs, and your indigenous people that you're not really rescuing too much, are you? It's a song just for you. So anyway, enough shouting out my own music. Anyways, yeah, Talia, I wanted to ask you, like, how is the next project coming along? If you are you still working on Umurangi? I'm sorry, I might have missed what you said you were working on, but how is your current work going?
Yeah, so we're progressing pretty well. Basically, the next game's kind of going to be about ideologies, but it's kind of about this idea of seeing where do these sort of neoliberal ideologies, what do they actually agree on, or what do they actually not agree on? Like, or how would I say this? Basically, there are a lot of ideologies in the game, because it's kind of a game where it's like 7 different characters, and they're all from very different ideologies. Well, I'd say different, but some of them have like, they try to say they have surface differences when they really don't. And that's kind of to say, like, one of the best bits of advice I got was from an Aboriginal academic called Lyndon Murphy, and he said, "There's no point really like looking at." I think this was him who said this, but anyway, he said something to the effect of, "There's no point really seeing, what are the surface issues. Look at where these different political parties," is what he was really talking about, but I think it really extends to ideology as well. But he says, look at where they agree on things, or what's their, what are their core things that they actually sort of believe in, and they might have different tracks to getting to that same position, but at the end of the day, it's they're the same ideology. It's just different tracks on how to get through it. Like we're sort of talking about this idea that like a lot of political parties will say that they're in favor of free speech, but they'll have a very different track on how they sort of get to their definition or belief of free speech, and that'll usually be the thing of like, if you're talking to someone who's like a conservative neoliberal, they'll say, I believe in free speech, so I should be able to say as many slurs as I want. And then if you talk to sort of a, left-wing neoliberal, they might say like, I believe in free speech, and therefore we have to invade Hong Kong, or something like that. You know what I mean? This very, this sort of thing. And so I think it's this kind of thing where, with this next game we're working on, we're sort of writing that, to have moments where you can sort of demonstrate that idea. But I think the idea is to say that, like, when it comes to a very bad situation, how do certain ideologies behave around it? So, and we saw that last year with sort of, how do all these ideologies or, political identities and stuff, how do they respond to the crisis of COVID? And, we saw that it was infighting in Western nation states and solving the problem in other nation states, like, China, Vietnam, etc. Got the issue solved quite quickly. Maori people quarantined their own iwi and tribal areas and put in their own, what would you call it, checkpoints to stop people from coming in and, hurting their old people. And, it was this kind of thing to say, which one of these ideologies is doing the right thing when it comes to this? And so that's what we're kind of thinking about with this next game. And I don't want to spoil anything because that's part of the fun of making something for someone to consume. But I think it's this whole idea that you would say, there are certain ideologies that are going to always pick certain things like material property and stuff over people. And there's, certain types of ideologies that can see beyond where they currently are, if that makes sense. If you talk to someone who's, how would I put this? If you talk to someone, I'll use an example. If you talk to someone who's like trans, they can see the positions of, the system at play because they encounter them every day. If you talk to someone who's Indigenous, they'll always encounter those, impositions because they're there put specifically to stop Indigenous people from succeeding. And that is to say, the ideas of saying like, language is a big part of being able to, how would you put this, navigate sort of like an ontology. So language is a way that, you're able to sort of actually explain culture or, explain ways of thinking. And that is to say that, like, Indigenous languages have specific words that are made for explaining certain concepts well. And when, you have rules that come in that say you can't speak that language anymore, it's an imposition to try and stop that culture from being able to be practiced. And, when you see the legacy of colonization, you might say, oh, well, there's no rules like that anymore. Well, tough luck. The, last 200 years actually did count for a lot of that damage. There's not really this kind of idea that, like if there's usually this thing where people try to ignore the historical context of things. And, the reality is when you try to destroy something and you have it close to death, it's very hard for it to come back to life. It takes a lot of work to really revitalize things. So, when it comes to language, it is a thing that takes time and it is a very difficult thing to really build up. And, I think it's just one of those things where this next game we're working on is sort of like a horror game, third person. But the idea is sort of that, when you play the game, you'll be able to sort of make decisions on who do you think, whose ideology do you actually think is doing well, or whose ideology do you sort of agree with? And so that's the idea, is that like for a lot of the work that we've sort of been doing is we've really been, I think, taking a lot more of a theoretical look at a lot of it. Like I read, if you've read Mark Fisher's work, I think that's very. Have you read Mark Fisher?
The Capitalist Realism, I think. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. That's a really good one, and Escaping the Vampire's Castle is a really good one too, if you've read that. But Escape from the Vampire's Castle has a really good. I think it has just like the most. It's like Mark Fisher has those kind of moments where he just writes and he'll say something in a sentence that just sums up the whole book so well. But every single sentence sums up the book. But basically, he's in Escape the Vampire's Castle. He talks about this idea of think like a liberal because you are one. Like when he's talking about people who can't see beyond, like they can't really see beyond the sort of like more sinister stalling that a lot of that stuff does. like kind of the whole thing that this is a text I think from 2011. He talks kind of about that idea that the Earth's dying, and there's a problem with sort of like the let's make a big deal defending Obama's suit, or let's talk about this petty bullshit rather than actually like moving beyond that into sort of a more class discussion of sort of like where billionaires are destroying everything. But basically we've been sort of doing a lot of reading around that stuff. I can't really talk too much about it just in terms of like giving a concrete thing unless you were to like ask questions. But yeah, other than that, I think it's coming along well, which is cool. I think it's like really rapidly progressing out of gray box, if that makes sense. Like when you make games, you sort of start with a little gray box test environment, and you slowly build up your little mechanics on top of that, and just sort of a safe bit. And then once you've sort of got that sorted, then you sort of chuck it in a level and see how it works. But the example everyone always uses is like Mario 64. I spent months just him as a little square, just trying to make sure the jump was right. And then once they got that, they were able to sort of move on to adding other stuff in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Mario's. Yeah, Mario. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in development. Actually, no, like the guy who made Tetris. Speaking of like ancient Nintendo games, I actually worked for the guy who made and owns Tetris for a while. He lives in Hawaii. Right. He's one of the richest people in the world. But he's he was on the Hokulea too, so he's okay. No, I shouldn't talk bad about him because he lives like pretty close to where I am, and I've worked for him. But yeah, like.
No, you like tap on the window while you're doing your next live stream, eh?
Yeah, he'd be like, "Hey,
come out and find me."
Stop talking about me. I own all the police in the military. Stop talking about me.
Yeah.
It's like yeah. But yeah, no, totally. I get what you're saying though. Like, it sounds very interesting. Like the concept of ideology, like being a gameplay kind of a mechanic, or being a major.
I think the idea we're sort of going on is this idea that like there are things certain ideologies can't help but do because they can't exist outside of it, right? Like if you talk to a capitalist, they're never going to not defend private property, right? Even if like the worst thing has happened, the most you'll probably get out of them is kind of this idea of saying, oh, that was wrong, but they shouldn't have burnt that, or they shouldn't have destroyed that building. The person who was hurting them was doing the wrong thing, but they shouldn't have whatever. So an example like in this game is, to say, okay, we know that if we stay in this current place, things are going to get really bad. Now, someone on your, like the captain, is a sort of, you're sort of old school liberal, your blue democrat-y type ideology. And so his thing is, just trust the system. It'll work. Let's just follow the procedures that are currently set forth in the instruction manual on how to handle this situation, and everything will go away. Block your ears, close your eyes, and it'll all be over before you know it, right? And the idea is to say that, like, when that stuff starts to happen, the thing they're dealing with is a very specific type of threat, and it's not going to really, like, how would you put it? It's not going to really listen to their rules because it's not really even conscious of those. Like, it's not even really thinking about those rules at all. Like, the thing I'm kind of thinking could be sort of a parallel to this is just kind of like, with the stuff going on with climate change, there's always that idea that, if you just get the right people in charge, we'll have this solved in, a couple of months, right? And then 20 years pass and it's, still, even when you get quote unquote, the most progressive president in the world or whatever the hell people call Joe Biden, it's like, still nothing gets done. Because, at the end of the day, coal barons have an overriding, rule on this stuff. Like they have to answer to someone, and that person they're answering to doesn't care about the best ideas. They care about making money. So, yeah. Anyway, I've actually kind of got to go. In a little bit. Thanks for having me all on. Listening to me ramble on that, but I think it was pretty good.
Yeah. No, thanks for coming on again. You guys should definitely. I'm sorry, I don't have everybody's. We're kind of not all on camera ready here, so it's okay. But you should follow Veselikov, and of course, also known as Naphtali or Tali, and the game that's currently out from Veselkov is Umurangi Generation. And again, as I said, highly recommend it. So do if you haven't, I think some people here, I want to say most people know what it is. If you haven't played it yet, I highly recommend playing Umurangi Generation and checking out. Or if you know anybody who plays video games, do check it out and support.
So I would say, follow the game account if you want to really see game stuff, and if you just want to see me shit posting, you follow me on Twitter.
Yeah, oops, I'm sorry. I was putting all your shit posting on blast. No, this is the this is the game. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Good to talk again. Of course, as always.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks heaps everyone, and sorry for being late.
No problem. Anyway, so yeah, we're probably we're probably gonna end probably in 2 hours, probably good. But Santos again. If you have anything else you kind of want to, because we're going to probably be wrapping up in the next 20 minutes or so, like, is there any other thing you really wanted to talk a little bit more about in particular?
I think I'm pretty good. I think we covered a lot of really interesting stuff. I'm actually I'm not sure what else I could bring up, but no, I think I'm very happy with what we went over, and I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to chat about, but I think I'm pretty happy.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I'm just looking through. See, I'm already addicted. I'm in the metaverse. I'm already owned by the neoliberal, overlords. I can't stop scrolling Twitter. But it's okay. I'm not doom scrolling. I'm indigis scrolling. That's different. That's different. But yeah, no, it's there's so much. There's really so much to talk about. Also, thanks to Lasu. Lasu is another indigenous streamer and educator that just dropped in there. I forgot to mention that earlier. But speaking of, trying to think of what's the best way to kind of wrap this up. Also Della's in there. Yeah, Della, another indigenous friend of ours and of the Silver Spoon community. There's so much really that can be discussed. One thing I like, when kind of going back to some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. Speaking of capital, just kind of jumping off of what Tali was talking about with capital, this kind of capitalist. The Vampire Castle is basically a story where people kind of are trapped within their inability to see an exit from their own, ideas about what the world is and what the possibilities of the world being, and they're kind of stuck in this kind of vampiric, self-destructive castle that they can't imagine their way out of. And to my mind, it's more, it's capitalism, it's neoliberalism, and all of this is tied into colonization, which racialized capitalism. The United States as a kind of a leading force in that, but not exclusively. Of course, the Spanish did a lot of horrors down there in South Central America and across the world. And I kind of describe it. Sometimes I'll go back and kind of describe it as barbarism. Of a variety of characteristics. There's slavery, there's feudalism, and the reality is the Romans, it's not like capitalism was invented by America. They were oligarchs that were burning parts of Rome and then collecting on the insurance, like the way that big Wall Street firms collect on the burning of Californian properties and make money in the financial. They're different financial markets, but these are really old. I argue sometimes that it's more it's old trauma against. There were indigenous peoples in Europe, and they were kind of heavily broken, erased. Their languages were banned, like Hawaiian, as Tali was talking about. Many of our languages were banned, our cultures were banned, and you erase with that a lot of the ways of the people. And that huge trauma, over 1,000 years ago, kind of never was healed from. And this is a people, and the first feudal lords actually were, a lot of them were Roman oligarchs who lost faith in Rome's ability to maintain its empire. And it's kind of that kind of deep civilizational trauma has not really been healed from, in the sense of healing as for Native Hawaiians, right? When we talk of healing, right, we talk about ho'oponopono. It's a word, speaking of language, right, that means to make right, to make things right. Pono is righteousness, justice, right? Uamau ke eo oka aina ika pono is a word that was used as an example of when the Native Hawaiians, when our sovereign country was temporarily because we were never fully colonized, and we still weren't. Technically, we're still not a colony to this day. I'm trying to find my little picture. When the sovereign country of Hawaii was illegally occupied by not the United States, but by Britain, and they claimed that Hawaii was a part of it, the Hawaiians had to fight to the nail for this civilization that I've talked about. Like, we had the most advanced industrialized civilization, world's first universal healthcare in Queen's medical system, 25 years before Otto von Bismarck in Europe. We had full citizenship for Black, Asian people, etc. We had electricity before the White House. We had subaquatic vehicle inventions before there were submarines. We had the world's first universal education system, the highest literacy rate on the planet Earth, when Europeans were still diseducated. The majority of the population didn't have education. That was reserved for the feudal and capitalist and colonialist oligarchs. And it always was that way for the last centuries upon centuries upon centuries. It never changed since they couldn't even remember when, basically, right? And so for Hawaii to fight that, to make right meant for Hawaii's sovereign kingdom, right? This actually anti-racist, actually successful socialist civilization, like similar to what Bolivia is doing, what Libya tried to do and America destroyed that. What China and Vietnam are more successfully doing, which is why their COVID cases and numbers and their success in every rubric is far in advance, is because like they've actually like made right. I would argue like they've actually made pono, meaning like it doesn't just mean saying sorry. Like a lot of Americans and Canadians and liberals like to say, "Oh, I'm sorry that there was racism," and they have like white fragility conferences and these kind of things. But saying you're sorry doesn't make up for the $450 trillion that was taken from Bolivia, from Paraguay, from the indigenous peoples, Africa, Asia, of the Pacific, of the Americas. Saying sorry is not pono. For Hawaiians, that's to make whole pono. You sit down with all of the community, the elders, the family, both families, everybody, like all of the people, and you discuss like what was taken, if somebody stole or violated someone. And it means not just saying sorry and then having a nice little letter, right? And then taking a picture with some of the people that you harmed, right? Like the president, right? We're talking about Britain. They take pictures at the COP26 right now about how we cared about the global South so much, right? That's not ho'oponopono. That's PR. That's
it's posturing too.
It's posturing, yeah. But it's not concretely like making right the wrongs that you have done. And so to make ho'oponopono, it's kind of like, but people talk about restorative justice, right? That's a big topic for how to deal with police brutality, carceral system, prison, and the problems of the carceral structures. But like to have restorative justice, you have to have a restored pono community. So, and like it's really, I would argue, like part of the problem, the reason why you can't get to this is like a long rant, but like you can't really get to the point where you can like restore people back into justice, because the people who have, and it's a way the people are talking now, thankfully, about cumulative emissions, right? Because what the COP26 argument is, well, Bolivia, Paraguay, Africa, Asia, you guys got to stay underdeveloped because we just can't allow any more emissions, and we all have to do our part. So you should have no roads and no electricity, because that's too much. Europe and America and the first world the colonizers have used all of America's carbon budget, so you should suffer. But that is not pono, right? Like that is the truth is the global North has to give up a lot and allow like some amount of development to not to say that they're going to make right the 450 trillion and the slavery, the genocide, the banning of the languages, but just to get the people who are the majority of the world, like us, right, and our families and our relatives, to some baseline of housing, just some basic housing. You don't have to be consuming 25 iPhones a year, but like some baseline of healthcare, basic electricity, basic roads, basic, infrastructure, clean water, and then, right, and to pay for that, colonizers have to give up, and that's part of their making pono as an entire colonial class up there in the global North. And anyway, that's a lot of words I just said. So I don't know if would you agree with that? Or I don't know. I would guess that, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense, and it reminded me of like so specifically for like COP26. So Paraguay has always had a very right-wing government for a variety of reasons. we had a dictatorship for a very long time that targeted indigenous people, indigenous communities, and we've had right-wing governments for the majority of the past presidentships since like the late 80s, and they are very much on the side of like private corporations, on the side of these companies that come in and take land and use them for profit. And Paraguay sent some people to COP26, but it was only people that were representing like agribusiness. So they didn't send any indigenous people, they didn't send any peasants, they didn't send anyone that is actually like negatively impacted by, climate change or like climate devastation. Especially Paraguay is actually the country in South America that is the most impacted right now by climate change, because there's so much deforestation that goes on that there's more and more droughts each year, and there's also more and more floodings each year because the trees are there to like soak up the water and to stop floodings from happening. But with that natural barrier gone, then you're getting a lot more flooding, and then you also are not getting as much like rainfall as well. And like the drier parts, like there's whole parts of the country that are just desert now, not because that is the way that it is, but because of climate change, those areas and regions have dried up and they're now desert. um, and with like indigenous communities, especially living in those areas, it deeply impacts the sustainability of all the communities there. And there is like also kind of I guess like saying or theory that it is kind of similar to what you were mentioning. So in Guarani, Teko Apora means like basically like a good community. And to have a good community, you have to have land, and to have, in the sense that you have to live on land that is your community. So usually when talking about land and community, those two things are the same in Guarani because of the fact that community happens on your land, and that can't happen if you are landless and if you are being evicted from your home. So the Tecuapora kind of like saying is that, to have a good life, you also have to have a good community and to have a sustainable way of life. So that also kind of reminded me of that as well, because, especially in South America, in places like the Amazon and like other places in South America, the places where indigenous people live, they're going to be, and they are the places that are the most heavily impacted by climate change, while indigenous people protect the land that they are on and protect it from climate change, protect it from, these private corporations that want to take it and carve it up and turn it into something that is not going to, it's not going to be healthy for anyone. And so that very much reminded me of that, and the fact that with like the recent, climate change conventions and all those things, indigenous people and peasants in Paraguay aren't really being represented. Their concerns aren't really being represented in any way, and that's being done on purpose because the government is very right wing, very, doesn't believe in climate change, just wants to make as much profit as possible. And they even actually recently passed a law I think it was either back in October or September, they passed a law that basically increases the punishment for anyone that is trespassing. And that is basically very much aimed at indigenous people in the rural countryside who refuse to leave their ancestral lands, because then the government just accuses them of trespassing on private property, and then they can be sent to jail. And now they actually increase the sentence, like the length of sentence for that specific action. So a lot of these things are all linked together in many different ways. Be it from climate change to a government that has, very right wing fascist laws and practices towards indigenous people and other communities. And that also like is again one of those other like kind of real world events or things that that stick with me as I'm making a story or as I'm making a game, that I'm also very much thinking about those things and how what does it mean to depict indigenous people taking land back in a game, and what kind of future can we envision that indigenous people don't have to don't have to struggle to have something that is rightfully theirs, and to imagine a world where nature is also respected and preserved.
Yeah, totally. I'm definitely look forward to seeing what you can do with that. Just like before we go, because it's about 5 minutes. A couple of things I wanted to say on the topic of indigenous people actually doing a lot of the work, while not really being represented at events organized at such as COP26. That in fact I think it was only four indigenous groups, four island nations of the Pacific that are currently sinking beneath the waves. Speaking of being impacted by climate change, only four were invited. Many were disinvited. All the major indigenous movements were explicitly excluded from attending the COP26. This is basically just this is like a capitalist colonizer pageant to make them look like they're doing things. I don't know what this is, but so anyways, so but here's a little article that's about we're not just talking because Santo and I and Tali are indigenous and we want to just act like we're saving the world, but indigenous people, according to a scientific study, have staved off 25% of US and Canada's annual emissions. I'm sure also there's a big number for that for South Central America, but they just don't have it in this study. But the United States is the number one emitter on the earth, and indigenous people in the United States make up less than 2% of the population. And yet they stopped 25% over at least a decade. They have stopped 25% of the emissions. It's really, if you think about it, right? Indigenous people are doing, by that count, 12 times their weight in stopping climate change, right? If the colonizer of the United States, right, did 1/10 what indigenous people do, you'd be net zero by that act. If they all joined in to support the people at the Coastal GasLink pipeline, these fossil fuel big corporate projects in Canada and the US, DAPL, et cetera, and the same thing happening in South Central America. We would be there. It's really, indigenous people are literally the solution. The scientists know this, right? But why are they being excluded? One other thing I want to say is our another comrade from our Asian country that's also indigenous to Vietnam. People are actually arguing to Luna that Luna, who is a Vietnamese woman, is a settler colonizer of the Vietnamese people. I don't know how they were just. Luna had a picture of her family. We have been here for 6,000 years. Here's a pot from like 4,000 years ago that our people created. But anyway, this is some of the way that people try to justify, right? This thing is that indigenous people, like, this is a little thread. I don't know. This is really irritating me a lot. But they're saying that Luna is a settler in Vietnam. The indigenous people were all throwing spears at each other, harming each other, colonizing each other. So the French and the Americans in Vietnam, and the Spanish, and they say this about Hawaii too. The Hawaiians were all settler colonizing each other. So when the Americans showed up and the British showed up, they don't have to give you anything because you are just as bad. That's one of the assembly of lies. But anyways, so people are telling Luna, like, on Land Back, I was talking about this. Luna's family. This is a plot in Vietnam, just another place where they've actually are more successful at undoing colonized. They kicked all their colonizers out, right, in the multiple wars. But Luna has, it's 500 meters squared. It is given for free to the people to work. 500 meters squared. To be clear, is less than 1/8 of an acre. It's less than an eighth of an acre, less than half the size of an average American, house with a lawn, and people are not given the, it's just another form of what it might look like. Means that you people don't own the land this is very similar to what I was looking at. Like, this is what Hawaiians think, which is that we do have our ancestral land, but we don't own the land. We tend to the land in as ecological a way as possible. It's called malama aina for us here, and the aina is that which feeds and sustains. And you don't own it, right? You come from the land and you care for the land as it is your mother, and so similarly, it's a more codified way, but it's basically doing that where each person is given an equal amount, and ideally like in their ancestral area. And Luna's actually grandfather was somebody who was, had too much land, and they broke that up and they said, you can't have 10, 100 acres. You can have one, this is your land per person. And you can, if you don't want to work on it, like Les Luna goes and they make YouTube videos, and they're more in the city doing technological work, right? Like we have a small farm in the front. We have a small agricultural where we plant our indigenous staple food, kalo, in the front of our house here. But myself and our family, we don't do that for a living. But we do that kind of to try to keep maintaining our cultural and agricultural practices. But so the family, like Luna's aunt has some who Luna's aunt kind of takes care of like 10 people's small plot with, modern advanced, tractors and such and irrigation techniques, right? But it is maintained in as ecologically a way as possible. It is maintained. It is not owned and then operated with, for example, exploited peasant farmers with rich, disproportionately white transnational corporations, right? Farming it and then keeping the profit, like what you're describing, right? The big agribusiness in South America. So I mean, just an example of one small piece of what, some people are scared of land back, right? That's the thing that happens, right? Some people are scared of indigenous people, quote unquote, taking over. That's a fear in North America in particular. But what it looks like is just like not having capitalist and feudal structures running for the exploitation of people and the degradation of the land, the use of the land and the use of people's labor. So anyway, this is very interesting because this thing got 50,000 shares and people were yelling at Luna, "You're a colonizer, you're a feudal lord, you're a landlord, you all kind of nonsense." But anyway,
yeah,
I don't want to.
I think I saw that come up, like that discussion come up on my timeline as well, and it made me laugh a little in the sense that it was a lot of Americans not understanding how the metric system work or what farming is. Like I grew up with the metric system because I'm from South America, and to me, like I already know 500 meters squared is very small. It's not enough to actually, make a profit. It's just a piece of land to like, feed your family, feed yourself, without needing to, hire anyone to like work that land. And there's also that disconnection of like people not understanding how farming works because, like I mentioned, my mom's family, they were all campesinos, which are the peasant class in Paraguay. And my grandfather grew up in the countryside, and they barely had any food to eat. Like they were like 8 brothers and sisters, and they would have to. And this is something that my grandfather, even into his old age, he still has this habit where like he eats very fast, and that's something he had from his childhood because as a child living a peasant life in South America, like he would eat really fast because he got more food that way. So he had to compete with his siblings to eat more food because they had so little that there was not enough for everyone. And growing up as a peasant, he also didn't have clothes, so they spent most of their lives actually naked. And my great grandmother had to make them clothes out of like bags of sugar. So my great grandfather worked at a sugar mill. And he would bring like empty sugar bags at the end of the day, and that's what they would, make their clothes out of to be able to go to school. And all of the labor that my great grandfather did, and to anyone else in my mom's family, the labor they did, they owned none of it, and they were somehow working on farmland, but they didn't get to eat any of the food that they were growing because it was for someone else's profit. And I think that, yeah, that type of thing also comes from like people just not understanding the reality that peasants live in like the global south specifically, where something like what Vietnam has, Cuba also has a similar program where people do get parcels of land so that they can grow things that are not going to be meant for profit. They're just going to be meant for feeding your family so that you can have that food for yourself, especially if you're a peasant. Um, and I think there's, yeah, definitely that disconnection of understanding how land is used by other people, and also that, um, just because you have land, that like the whole purpose of like land back and also land reform, especially in places like, let's say, Paraguay, is so that peasants can have their own land so that they are not starving to death because they are working and working on farmland that is owned by someone else, uh, whose food goes somewhere else and the profits go somewhere else. And then, they come back home with an empty sugar bag and no food. If my grandfather, for example, had a parcel of 500 meters squared, he could have fed a lot of his siblings. He could have fed, you know, his parents could have been well fed as well. But there's definitely that disconnection of not understanding like just how bad it is to be a landless peasant in the global south, and what a kind of like a radical difference it can make just to own like a little bit of land that technically isn't even yours, because again the concept of ownership is like different under socialism and under other systems of land management, where like you're looking after this piece of land, you're stewarding it, you're not taking it from someone else, and you're not making profit off of it. It's literally just there for uh, like subsistence farming. But yeah, no, I found the thing, yeah, very, very silly, and reminded me how people, as well-meaning as they are about learning about the global south, they still can't grasp the reality of what being a peasant really is like.
Yeah, totally. It's a thing. Like, I mean, I have the, I often say like I have that luxury of growing up. I mean, I grew up in a very impoverished, like urban reservation kind of thing, but still in the, Hawaii is still, illegally occupied, colonized Hawaii, but it's, within, it's not like global South peasant or like a war zone of the U.S. like Afghanistan or Iraq or somewhere that's really even more deeply harmed. At least immaterially. Not to say that the harm isn't happening in these urban areas of, places like the U.S., et cetera. But, I try to like communicate like, these things could be a lot. I think that that's a big part. That's a big, big part of it, is that very few people in the global North really understand what that means to not have basic things, like really not have food, like no food, and like have like no water, like no toilet, even toilet, like Luna's like, my favorite food was fried grasshoppers, and we had to poop in a lake and hope that we didn't get horrible diseases, like these basic kind of things that are not grasped, that most of the world has. I mean, hopefully not much longer, but because the global socialists will keep on doing this, degradation. But it's really like, I think it's so, the disconnect is so bad. That the worst one was some white guy was an Asia expert, and he literally was on a big talk. He talks about China, he talks about Vietnam, he talks about Laos. He's like works for a big university. And he said, Luna, I don't believe you. Show me your calluses. Show me you can't be you don't look like a farmer to me. And this looks like a guy, well-to-do, probably went to Oxbridge, what do you know about farming? Like, what do you know about this? And not the only person saying that, but that's like, part of it is like, part of it I think is a little bit of a guilt, where people in the United States, they know that, you don't look like a farmer because farmers are the white people have the farms, and sad brown people that are in the United States picking the tomatoes for me. And you don't look depressed. You don't look like you're as downtrodden as the peasant class, which is still in the United States, a lot of them under table non-white labor. And so, there's a kind of projection of like, you can't be farm. Vietnam, Cuba can't have happy farmers. You can't have people that like have their material needs met, because in my capitalist, Western country, we don't meet the material. We oppress our farmers. I think that's part of it too. But yeah, anyways, but yeah, anyway, on a positive note, we should probably end. It's 4:10. Always fun to dunk on some imperialists at the end, though. It's fun to do that. You should definitely follow. Again, this is the main thing, is we want to make sure everybody knows that Santo is working on a very cool game through is it Brujeria at Work? Is that how you say it?
Yes, yeah.
So you should follow Brujeria at Work on Twitter or any other places that you might follow, or brujeria@work.com. And the game is CybeRRRevolution. And this game is currently in progress. It is an indigenous made game that's dealing with everything we just talked about, as we said. And it's also got really cool art. It's got a trailer now. And you can support also at patreon.com/tomatrioska. And yeah. So anyway, I'm trying to make sure as many people as possible. I'm gonna upload this to YouTube later on. I'll put it in the series of the panels. But the main thing is, everybody knows that this is a game that's coming soon from indigenous developers from around the world. But you, of course, from Paraguay. Yeah. Any final words before we finish up?
No, thank you so much for having me on to chat about the project, chat about other things as well. But yeah, if anyone wants to follow along with the development, you can check out Brujeria Work, our Twitter, our website, or HIO has kind of like, that's where you can find up-to-date information. You can also check out the hashtag on Twitter, Guarani Mecha. It's just like a hashtag that I use from time to time to upload some of my art and some of the stuff I've kind of been experimenting with. But now it's more hashtag CybeRRRevolution that some stuff will be filed under as well. But yeah, and the Patreon that I post some kind of behind the scenes stuff to is Tomatrioska. And yeah, I'm on a bit of a break, but I will be back next weekend with some more updates about development and some art. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And of course, everybody knows who I am. Yeah, a game that I'm working on is, of course, Neofeud. Here's some screenshots from Neofeud 2, doing lots of, as fast as I'm trying to get it out. I wanted to get it out in 2021, but I can't guarantee that it will come out this year. But it is, Neofeud 2 deals with decolonization of the entire galaxy, in fact. So just imagine a decolonized Milky Way and possibly the universe. You see, yeah, I think it's
nice.
land universe back. Cosmos back, as they would say. But yeah. Anyways, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. I will probably be back in a little bit. But if you're watching this on YouTube, thanks a lot for watching. And until next time, support your indigenous peoples and developers, and aloha, and try to ho'oponopono, as we say, as best as you can manage.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay. All right.